I just got tired of it, you know what I mean? I got tired of making responses.
There's nothing quite like watching a legend fall to hubris, and with The Ultimate Warrior, the fall was as massive as they come. The source of his downfall? Well, narcissism, questionable choices, and all the vices you can think of. But that's only where the story begins, so let's get right into it. The rise of an icon, from bodybuilder to wrestling immortality. What happens when you take a man fueled by pure intensity, wrap him in neon face paint, and unleash him on the world of professional wrestling? You get one of the most electrifying, controversial, and ultimately tragic figures the sport has ever seen. This is the story of the Ultimate Warrior, a man who soared to heights most wrestlers only dream of, only to have his legacy consumed by the very fire that made him famous. James Bryan Hellwig wasn't born a warrior. He was born on June 16, 1959, in the small town of Crawfordsville, Indiana, into circumstances that would have broken lesser men. His childhood was marked by turmoil, a father who abandoned the family, financial struggles that seemed insurmountable, and the kind of instability that either destroys you or forges you into something unbreakable. Young James chose the latter path, and at just 11 years old, he discovered the iron. Weightlifting became more than a hobby. It became his salvation, his therapy, his pathway to transformation. Throughout high school, Hellwig channeled his intensity into football, showcasing the raw athleticism that would later make him a wrestling phenomenon. After graduation, he pursued studies in finance and education at Indiana State University, but the conventional path wasn't meant for a man with fire in his veins. The weights kept calling, and eventually, Hellwig answered that call full-time, diving headfirst into the world of competitive bodybuilding. And he didn't just compete, he conquered. In 1984, he captured the NPC Mr. Georgia title, establishing himself as a force to be reckoned with in the bodybuilding circuit. But bodybuilding, for all its glory, couldn't contain the explosion waiting to happen. At 26 years old, with muscles built through countless hours of dedication and a hunger for something more, Hellwig made a decision that would change the course of wrestling history. He walked into the world of professional wrestling, and he never looked back. On November 23, 1985, in Memphis, Tennessee, Hellwig made his professional wrestling debut in the Continental Wrestling Association. But he wasn't alone. Partnered with Steve Borden, who wrestling fans would come to know as the legendary Sting, the two formed a tag team called the Freedom Fighters. Hellwig wrestled under the name Justice, and together with his partner, they were managed by the experienced hands of Buddy Wayne and Dutch Mantell. The crowd loved them as baby faces, the good guys fighting for what's right. But in wrestling, nothing stays the same for long. The Freedom Fighters turned heel, embracing the dark side, but the partnership wasn't built to last. By January 1986, the team had disbanded, but both men were just getting started. March 1986 brought a new chapter. The duo resurfaced in the Universal Wrestling Federation as the Blade Runners, a name that was essentially a parody of the immensely popular Road Warriors. Hellwig became Blade Runner Rock, while his partner took on the name Blade Runner Sting. They were part of Eddie Gilbert's stable, Hot Stuff International, and for a brief moment, they seemed destined for greatness together. But creative differences have a way of tearing apart even the strongest partnerships. In June 1986, just 3 months after joining UWF, Hellwig walked away, citing irreconcilable differences with the direction of his character and the promotion itself. That same month, a new territory beckoned. Hellwig arrived in world-class championship wrestling in Dallas, Texas, reborn as the Dingo Warrior. This time, he wasn't a hero. He was a heel, a villain managed by the crafty Gary Hart. His primary target? The handsome Rick Rude, and their feud captivated Dallas audiences. But wrestling is theater, and characters evolve. A storyline involving Buzz Sawyer and Matt Bourne saw Dingo Warrior turn babyface once again, and the crowd erupted. They had found their new hero. Teaming with Lance Von Erich, Dingo Warrior captured his first major championship, the WCWA World Tag Team Championship, on November 17, 1986, defeating Master G and Matt Bourne. The reign was brief, lasting only until December 1, 1986, when they lost the titles to Al Madril and Brian Adias, but Warrior had tasted championship gold, and he wanted more. So much more. 1987 would prove to be the year everything changed. On February 2nd, 1987, Dingo Warrior defeated Bob Bradley in a tournament final rematch to capture the WCWA Texas Heavyweight Championship. He was a singles champion now, a main event player in one of wrestling's hottest territories. Title was briefly held up in April when he took a short departure from the promotion, but when he returned, it was reinstated, recognizing him as the rightful champion. He held that championship until June 1987, when he vacated it for one simple reason. He was heading to the big time. He was heading to the World Wrestling Federation. June 1987 marked Hellwig's arrival in the WWF. Though at first, he wasn't the Ultimate Warrior the world would come to know. He wrestled house shows throughout the summer as Dingo Warrior, systematically destroying enhancement talent like Steve Lombardi and Barry Horowitz. The WWF was testing him, seeing if he could handle the biggest stage in professional wrestling, and handle it he did, with devastating efficiency. Then came October 25th, 1987, and everything exploded. On WWF Wrestling Challenge, the Ultimate Warrior made his televised debut, no longer carrying the Dingo moniker. The transformation was complete, with face paint that looked like war streaks, tassels flying from his arms, and an entrance sprint that suggested a man possessed by something beyond human. The Ultimate Warrior pinned Terry Gibbs with his signature move. The Gorilla Press Slam followed by a running splash. The crowd went absolutely nuclear. They had never seen anything like this before. Here was a character who seemed ripped from the pages of a comic book, a superhero come to life, shaking the ropes with an intensity that was almost frightening in its authenticity. The comparisons were immediate and unavoidable. This wasn't just another muscular wrestler. This was something different, something special, something dangerous. By early 1988, Warrior was feuding with Hercules Hernandez, and at WrestleMania 4 on March 27, 1988, he faced Hercules in his pay-per-view debut. The match ended in disqualification when Hercules attacked Warrior with a steel chain, but nobody cared about the finish. They cared about the spectacle, the collision of two immovable objects, the pure physicality on display. Throughout 1988, Warrior was building momentum unlike anything the WWF had seen in years. He defeated members of Bobby the Brain Heenan's family in a series of matches where he would apply his devastating sleeper hold, putting opponent after opponent to sleep with ruthless efficiency. Losses were rare. Clean pins to Andre the Giant in Italy in April 1988 and to Dino Bravo in Montreal in June 1988 only emphasized just how dominant he was everywhere else. These weren't just matches, they were statements. The Ultimate Warrior was here, and he was unstoppable, but the WWF had bigger plans for their explosive new star, much bigger plans. August 29, 1988, SummerSlam, held at Madison Square Garden. This was the night everything changed, the night the Ultimate Warrior went from rising star to absolute superstar. The Honky Tonk Man had held the WWF Intercontinental Heavyweight Championship for 454 days, the longest reign in the title's history. He was arrogant, obnoxious, and seemingly untouchable. The original plan had Brutus, the Barber Beefcake, challenging Honky Tonk, but Beefcake suffered a legitimate injury. A replacement was needed, and WWF management made a decision that would reverberate through wrestling history. The Ultimate Warrior was that replacement, and he sprinted to the ring like a man shot from a cannon. What happened next has become the stuff of legend. Gorilla Press Slam, splash, 1, 2, 3. 27 seconds. The Ultimate Warrior had defeated the Honky Tonk Man in just 27 seconds to become the new WWF Intercontinental Heavyweight Champion, ending the longest title reign in championship history in less time than it takes to microwave popcorn. The Garden exploded. Wrestling fans around the world watching on closed-circuit television lost their minds. A star had been born. No, not born, unleashed. At Survivor Series on November 24, 1988, Warrior captained a team and emerged as the sole survivor, pinning veterans Ron Bass and Greg Valentine. He wasn't just champion, he was dominant. He wasn't just winning, he was destroying. But every hero needs a worthy nemesis, and the Ultimate Warrior found his in ravishing Rick Rude. Their history stretched back to their days in Texas, but now the stakes were infinitely higher. The feud ignited at the Royal Rumble on January 15, 1989, during a pose-down segment. Warrior was showing off his physique, reveling in the crowd's adoration, when Rude launched a surprise attack that left Warrior laid out. It was personal now. It was war. At WrestleMania 5 on April 2, 1989, Rick Rude, with crucial interference from his manager Bobby Heenan, defeated the Ultimate Warrior to capture the Intercontinental Championship. The loss stung, but Warrior's intensity didn't diminish. If anything, it amplified. He wanted his championship back, and he wouldn't stop until he reclaimed what was his. The rematch came at the biggest party of the eye, summer. SummerSlam on August 28, 1989, saw the Ultimate Warrior defeat Rick Rude to regain the Intercontinental Championship, and the crowd's reaction suggested they had witnessed something special, because they had. Throughout the rest of 1989, Warrior defended his championship against all comers. He body-slammed the 520-pound Andre the Giant in squash matches that defied belief. At Survivor Series on November 23, 1989, he once again emerged as the sole survivor, eliminating Andre the Giant, Arn Anderson, and Bobby Heenan in a display of dominance that cemented his status as the company's next big thing. But the WWF had an even bigger moment planned, one that would define not just Warrior's career, but an entire era of professional wrestling. Because standing in his way was the biggest icon the business had ever seen, the immortal Hulk Hogan. Champion versus champion, icon versus icon. The ultimate challenge was set for WrestleMania 6. April 1st, 1990, at the Sky Dome in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, before 67,000 screaming fans, the Ultimate Warrior faced Hulk Hogan in a match that still gives wrestling fans chills decades later. This wasn't heel versus babyface. This was babyface versus babyface, two heroes colliding, and only one could walk out as the ultimate champion. The match was a masterpiece of storytelling, back-and-forth action that had the crowd on their feet for the entire duration. And when Warrior hit his Warrior Splash and the referee's hand hit the mat for 3, history was made. The Ultimate Warrior had defeated Hulk Hogan clean in the middle of the ring to become the WWF champion. In that moment, he became the first wrestler to hold both the WWF Championship and the Intercontinental Championship simultaneously, though he vacated the IC title immediately. More than that, the torch had been passed. The Hulkamania era was over, and the Age of the Warrior had begun, or so everyone thought. Backstage battles and personal demons. The confetti had barely settled from WrestleMania 6, the crowd's roar had barely faded from memory, and already the cracks were beginning to show. Because the truth about the Ultimate Warrior, the truth that would ultimately define his legacy more than any championship victory, was that the man behind the face paint was as volatile as the character he portrayed. And in the cutthroat world of professional wrestling, where egos clash and business is measured in dollars and ratings points, that volatility would prove to be his undoing. As WWF champion throughout 1990, Warrior defended his title against formidable opponents: Haku, Mr. Perfect, the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. He retained the championship in a steel cage match against Rick Rude at SummerSlam on August 27, 1990. He was embroiled in feuds with Macho King Randy Savage after Savage interfered in one of his title defenses, and he teamed with the Legion of Doom against Demolition. At Survivor Series on November 22, 1990, he was once again the sole survivor, and he even won the grand finale match against Hulk Hogan's team. On paper, the Ultimate Warrior was at the absolute peak of his profession, the undisputed king of the WWF mountain. But behind the scenes, trouble was brewing like a storm ready to devastate everything in its path. The backdrop to Warrior's impending explosion was the Gulf War storyline that had captivated American audiences in early 1991. Wrestling, always quick to capitalize on current events, created a villain in the form of Sergeant Slaughter, who had turned heel and aligned himself with Iraqi interests. At the Royal Rumble on January 19, 1991, in one of the most controversial booking decisions of the era, the Ultimate Warrior lost the WWF Championship to Sergeant Slaughter due to interference from Sensational Sherry and Randy Savage. The reign that was supposed to herald a new era had lasted less than a year, and Warrior was no longer champion. The loss to Slaughter devastated Warrior, but he channeled that frustration into his ongoing feud with Randy Savage. The rivalry culminated at WrestleMania 7 on March 24, 1991, in a career-ending match, a match where the loser would be forced to retire from professional wrestling. In a brutal, emotionally charged encounter, Warrior emerged victorious, supposedly ending Savage's career. Of course, this being professional wrestling, Savage would return eventually, but the moment was powerful, cathartic, a validation that even without the championship, the Ultimate Warrior was still a force to be reckoned with. But then came April 27, 1991, and everything started unraveling. The Undertaker locked Warrior in a coffin during a confrontation, a moment designed to set up a major feud between two of the company's biggest stars. Then Jake the Snake Roberts, in a shocking betrayal, orchestrated an attack where his Cobra bit Warrior, the Venom storyline adding another layer to what should have been blockbuster feuds. The creative was there. The momentum was there. The money was there. Except it wasn't. Not for Warrior. And that's when things got ugly. In July 1991, contract negotiations between the Ultimate Warrior and WWF owner Vince McMahon reached a critical impasse. Warrior, seeing himself as the rightful successor to Hulk Hogan and believing he deserved equal treatment, made demands that would shock the wrestling industry. He sent McMahon a fax demanding $550,000 for his WrestleMania 7 appearance, an amount equivalent to what Hogan had been paid. But that wasn't all. He demanded more guaranteed dates, better travel arrangements, and significantly higher merchandise royalties. His argument was simple but audacious. If he was being positioned as the face of the company, he should be compensated like the face of the company. McMahon, facing his biggest star effectively holding him hostage, acquiesced temporarily. He paid Warrior what he wanted, but internally, the relationship had been poisoned. Trust, once broken in the wrestling business, is almost impossible to repair, and things were about to get much worse. On August 26, 1991, the day after SummerSlam, the Ultimate Warrior was suspended. The official reason? He had allegedly threatened to no-show the event if his demands weren't met. Warrior's version was different. He claimed McMahon had betrayed him, had agreed to terms and then reneged, had treated him as expendable despite his value to the company. In October 1991, while still technically under contract until September 1992, Warrior resigned from the WWF. The planned feud with The Undertaker? Canceled. The money from a potential Jake Roberts rivalry? Gone. The Ultimate Warrior, at the height of his drawing power, had walked away from the WWF, or perhaps more accurately, he had been pushed away. The truth, as is often the case in wrestling, lies somewhere in the murky middle between competing narratives. But the story doesn't end there, because in professional wrestling, burned bridges sometimes get rebuilt when there's money to be made. On April 5, 1992, at WrestleMania the 8th in Indianapolis, Warrior's home state, the Ultimate Warrior made a shocking return to the WWF. The moment was electric. Hulk Hogan was being beaten down by Sid Justice and Papa Shango following Hogan's title loss, and the crowd was deflated, confused, unsure how their hero would escape this predicament. Then the music hit, that unmistakable, pulsating theme. And the Ultimate Warrior sprinted to the ring like he had never been gone, clearing the ring and standing side by side with Hogan in a moment that sent the crowd into absolute pandemonium. It should have been a fresh start. It should have been redemption. Instead, it was just a temporary ceasefire in a war that would never truly end. Warrior was granted significant creative control in his return, something virtually unheard of in the WWF at the time. He feuded with Papa Shango in a bizarre voodoo-themed storyline that saw him cursed with supernatural afflictions, black goo oozing from his head, mysterious ailments that defied medical explanation. It was weird, it was campy, but it was also undeniably captivating television. He defeated Randy Savage by countout at SummerSlam on August 29, 1992, continuing their rivalry in a match that showcased Warrior's intensity and Savage's psychological warfare. Plans were made for Warrior to team with Savage as the Ultimate Maniacs to face Ric Flair and Razor Ramon at Survivor Series. Promotional material was created, merchandise was designed, and fans were excited to see these two legends working together. But then came another ultimatum, another demand, another bridge set ablaze. Warrior was pulled from the Survivor Series event, and whispers started circulating throughout the wrestling world. He was difficult, he was unreliable, he was impossible to work with. On November 21, 1992, the Ultimate Warrior was released from the WWF. his last match having taken place on November 8, 1992, a victory over Kamala. The official narrative cited his smaller physique, allegedly a result of reducing his steroid use amid federal investigations into the WWF's drug culture. But those close to the situation knew there was more to it. Warrior had reportedly refused to turn heel, a character change that could have resulted in another WWF championship run. He blamed McMahon's evolving steroid policies for his diminished look and subsequent release. The timing was significant. The WWF was under intense federal scrutiny regarding steroid use among its performers. Mauro Di Pasquale, a physician and chemist who had tested positive in the investigations, allegedly urged Warrior's release to shield the company from further scandal. Whether this was truly the reason or simply a convenient excuse, the result was the same. The Ultimate Warrior was once again gone from the WWF, his reputation taking hit after hit. From 1992 to 1995, Warrior semi-retired from wrestling, operating Warrior University in Scottsdale, Arizona, where he trained aspiring wrestlers in his unique, intense style. He wrestled occasional independent shows as Dingo Warrior, reverting to his old name since The Ultimate Warrior was trademarked by the WWF, including a 1993 match where he defeated his old rival Hercules. But these were a far cry from the main events of Madison Square Garden and the enormous crowds of WrestleMania. Then came 1996, and incredibly, another WWF return. At WrestleMania 12 on March 31st, 1996, The Ultimate Warrior returned to squash Hunter Hearst Helmsley, the future Triple H, in a match lasting just 1 minute and 39 seconds. It was Vintage Warrior, a devastating display of power that reminded everyone why he had been such a phenomenon in the first place. He was back, he was dominant, and surely this time things would be different. They weren't. Warrior challenged Goldust for the Intercontinental Championship at In Your House 7 on April 28th, winning by countout but not capturing the title. He defeated Jerry the King Lawler at King of the Ring on June 23rd and beat Owen Hart by disqualification on July 8th. But behind the scenes, the same old patterns were emerging. No shows, missed dates, excuses that didn't quite add up. This time, Warrior claimed his father had died, necessitating time away from the company. But Vince McMahon, his patience finally exhausted, called him out publicly. McMahon pointed out that Warrior hadn't seen his father in over a decade, that their relationship had been non-existent, and that this was simply another excuse to avoid fulfilling his contractual obligations. There were also disputes about merchandise sales and royalties, Warrior claiming he wasn't receiving what he was owed, the company claiming he was breaching his contract. Whatever the truth, the result was inevitable. The Ultimate Warrior was fired again, this time with seemingly no possibility of return. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of this period wasn't the backstage drama or the contract disputes. It was how Warrior was beginning to be perceived by his peers and the wrestling media. Jim Ross, one of the most respected voices in professional wrestling, would later characterize Warrior as not a good guy, someone who was dangerously stiff in the ring. Triple H would recount how their WrestleMania 13 match was ruined by Warrior's refusal to cooperate or make his opponent look good, a cardinal sin in the collaborative art of professional wrestling. There were stories, never fully confirmed but widely circulated, of a 1988 house show where Warrior and Hulk Hogan nearly came to blows. Allegedly, Warrior no-sold Hogan's offense, refusing to cooperate with the planned match, and then stared him down backstage in a confrontation that could have turned violent. Ric Flair later claimed that Hogan refused to work with Warrior again after that incident, fearing the heat between them was too dangerous. Warrior later admitted to heavy steroid use during his peak years, acknowledging that the deceptive ways wrestlers sourced performance-enhancing drugs were both common and dangerous. He spoke about the health risks, the moral compromises, and how the culture of the industry essentially demanded pharmaceutical enhancement to maintain the larger-than-life physiques fans expected. It was a rare moment of honesty in an industry built on illusion, but it also added another layer to the narrative that the Ultimate Warrior was a product of excess, in ego, in drugs, and intensity that ultimately proved unsustainable. After his 1996 WWF firing, Warrior rejected overtures to return in 1997, but in 1998, he made a decision that would cement his reputation as box office poison, a wrestler whose presence could sink rather than save a promotion. In May 1998, he signed a lucrative multi-year deal with World Championship Wrestling, WCW, WCW, the WWF's primary competitor. On paper, it was perfect. Warrior would feud with his old rival Hulk Hogan, now the leader of the villainous New World Order faction. It should have been Money in the Bank, a dream feud revisited with both men as seasoned veterans. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about what happens when nostalgia meets reality, and reality loses badly. The fall from grace. The World Championship Wrestling run of The Ultimate Warrior stands as one of the most spectacular failures in professional wrestling history. A masterclass in how not to book a returning legend, combined with behind-the-scenes dysfunction, turned what should have been a ratings bonanza into a creative catastrophe that fans still mock decades later. But as disastrous as his WCW stint was professionally, it was his post-wrestling life and the inflammatory statements he would make that truly threatened to destroy whatever positive legacy remained from his glory days. Warrior's WCW debut came on August 17, 1998, on Monday Nitro, with enormous fanfare and even higher expectations. The company had paid him a reported $1.6 million for what was supposed to be a long-term deal that would see him counter Hulk Hogan's massive influence and bring legitimacy back to WCW's main event scene. But from the very first appearance, something was wrong. Terribly, almost comically wrong. Warrior's debut promo lasted over 20 minutes. An eternity in wrestling television where segments are carefully timed and paced. It was rambling, often incoherent, and completely unscripted, throwing the entire show's timing into chaos. Eric Bischoff, WCW's executive producer, would later express his frustration at how Warrior's insistence on creative freedom translated into self-indulgent promos that derailed carefully planned programming. But this was just the beginning of the problems. Warrior formed his faction called the One Warrior Nation, OWN for short, a parody of Hogan's NWO. His first recruit was the Disciple, a Hogan lackey who was essentially kidnapped and converted through what can only be described as mystical brainwashing. The storyline made little sense, but WCW pressed forward, adding supernatural elements to Warrior's character that included magic smoke entrances and appearances through a hidden trapdoor in the ring. That trapdoor would prove to be a literal trap for WCW's roster. At Fall Brawl on September 13, 1998, during a War Games match, the concealed trapdoor that Warrior would use for his dramatic entrance caused legitimate injuries to multiple wrestlers. Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldog, fell through it incorrectly and was nearly paralyzed, his career hanging in the balance due to a gimmick that had been kept secret from most of the roster for surprise purposes. Alex Wright also injured himself on the contraption. The fact that management had installed this device without properly informing the wrestlers about its location became a scandal within the locker room, breeding resentment toward Warrior specifically and WCW management in general. The match itself, where Warrior's team WCW lost to Team NWO when Diamond Dallas Page pinned Stevie Ray, was panned by critics and fans alike. But WCW, having invested so much money and promotional effort into Warrior's return, couldn't back out now. They had to push forward toward the inevitable showdown with Hulk Hogan, even as every creative decision seemed to make things worse. On October 12, 1998, on Monday, Nitro, Warrior teamed with Sting to face Hulk Hogan and Bret Hart. The match ended in disqualification, satisfying no one and advancing nothing. It was becoming clear that Warrior's in-ring work had deteriorated significantly from his WWF peak. His conditioning was questionable, and his willingness to cooperate with opponents was even more questionable. But the nadir came at Halloween Havoc on October 25, 1998. A pay-per-view that was already troubled by running significantly over its allotted time, causing thousands of homes to lose their cable feed before the main event even began. Those unfortunate enough to see the entire show witnessed something that Dave Meltzer, wrestling's most respected journalist, would rate at a -5 stars, a rating so bad it defied his normal scale. The match between Warrior and Hogan was supposed to be a nostalgia trip, calling back to their legendary WrestleMania 6 encounter. Instead, it was a botch-filled disaster that exposed both men as being well past their primes and unable to recapture past magic. The planned spot where a fireball thrown by Hogan's nephew Horace would blind Warrior failed spectacularly. The flash paper didn't ignite properly, forcing Warrior to sell being blinded by nothing. Hogan won via interference, but nobody won in the eyes of fans who had paid good money to see this travesty. Warrior would later allege that the entire match was deliberately sabotaged by Hogan as revenge for WrestleMania 6, that Hogan's man's ego couldn't handle being associated with a strong warrior, so he booked himself to go over in the most deflating way possible. Whether this is true or simply Warrior's persecution complex manifesting again is impossible to verify, but what is certain is that the match killed whatever momentum the feud had, and more importantly, it killed Warrior's credibility as a top-level performer. His final WCW appearance came on November 9th, 1998, on Monday Nitro, where he rescued the Disciple from an attack, and then he was gone. No farewell, no final match, no resolution to any storylines, just gone. The WCW run that was supposed to last years had lasted mere months. The $1.6 million investment had yielded nothing but disasters, injuries, and mockery. Wrestling fans today still cite Warrior's WCW run as one of the worst in professional wrestling history, a masterclass in how not to bring back a legend. But if fans thought that would be the end of the Ultimate Warrior's public controversies, they were tragically mistaken. Because James Hellwig was about to embark on a post-wrestling career that would make his in-ring antics look tame by comparison. After leaving wrestling, Warrior reinvented himself as a motivational speaker, delivering intense, high-energy speeches at colleges and corporate events. But his intensity, once channeled into entertaining wrestling promos, now manifested as something far darker and more disturbing. On a 2005 speaking engagement at the University of Connecticut, Warrior delivered what attendees described as a near-riot-inducing rant. When asked questions by students, his responses veered into shocking territory. To a question about LGBTQ+ rights, he infamously stated, "Queering don't make the world work. If all these people were queer, we'd die off." The comment drew immediate backlash from students and advocacy groups, but Warrior doubled down, later clarifying on his blog that he meant homosexuality would lead to humanity's extinction, as if that clarification made his homophobia any more palatable. But that wasn't even the worst of it. When an Iranian student asked him a question, Warrior responded with, "Get a towel," invoking racist stereotypes that sparked outrage in the auditorium. Police had to provide protection as he exited the venue, with protesters demanding the university apologize for hosting him. Despite this, DePaul University Republicans still booked him for a 2006 event, drawing protests from student groups and faculty members appalled that such a speaker would be given a platform. His blog, originally called Seek and Destroy, and later rebranded as Warrior's Machete, became an outlet for increasingly inflammatory rhetoric. Posts that were later deleted but preserved through screenshots and archives showed Warrior mocking Heath Ledger's death by calling him a faggot, attacking Martin Luther King Jr. as a thieving, lying, raping woman beater, and deriding Hulk Hogan's family as trash during their very public 2007 scandals. He railed against left-wing politics and described homosexuality as a societal illness, partnering with conservative commentator Daniel Pinheiro for speaking tours that further pushed anti-LGBTQ+ messages. These weren't isolated incidents or taken out of context. This was a sustained pattern of bigotry that alienated him from most of his wrestling peers. Jim Ross, typically diplomatic in his assessments of wrestlers, flatly stated that Warrior was not a good guy, citing these public statements as evidence of someone who had isolated himself through his own actions. Warrior even attacked the family of Owen Hart after the wrestler's tragic death in 1999, writing that he was no hero in a blog post that demonstrated shocking callousness toward a fellow wrestler's death and his grieving family. He labeled British Bulldog a drunken wife-beater and engaged in bitter online feuds with Hulk Hogan, calling him a hypocrite for preaching family values while his own family fell apart publicly. His first marriage to Sherry Tyree had ended in disaster back in 1991. In a 2021 episode of Dark Side of the Ring, Tyree detailed his infidelity that began shortly after winning the WWF Championship, recounting how he changed, came home with lipstick on his shirt. She served him divorce papers on March 20th, 1991, just days before WrestleMania 7, after discovering multiple affairs, including one that led to pregnancy rumors. Tyree even threatened to write a tell-all book exposing Warrior's behavior, though she never published it. He would remarry in 1999 to Dana Viale and father 2 daughters, but the damage to his personal reputation from that first marriage added another layer to the portrait of a man unable to maintain unstable relationships. These scandals created a situation where WWE was extremely reluctant to honor Warrior in any way. The 2005 DVD release, The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, painted him in an unflattering light, with fellow wrestlers giving scathing testimonials about his ego, unreliability, and difficult personality. Warrior sued for slander in 2006, claiming defamation, but the case was dismissed in 2009. The DVD became the official narrative for years. The Ultimate Warrior was talented but toxic, exciting but impossible, memorable but for all the wrong reasons. But then something unexpected happened, a reconciliation. In 2014, after years of bitter estrangement, Warrior and WWE began talks about a Hall of Fame induction. Bridges were mended with Vince McMahon. A famous photograph shows Warrior embracing Hulk Hogan backstage, two old rivals setting aside decades of animosity. On April 5, 2014, the Ultimate Warrior was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, delivering an emotional speech where he thanked fans and spoke about legacy and immortality in ways that, in hindsight, seem eerily prophetic. The next night, April 6th, he appeared at WrestleMania XXX, coming out to his iconic theme to present the first Warrior Award. On April 7th, he made his final appearance on Monday Night Raw, delivering a promo where he spoke about Warriors living forever through the stories told about them, about how every time you speak my name, you bring me back to life. Less than 24 hours later, on April 8th, 2014, James Bryan Hellwig collapsed while walking to his car with his wife outside a hotel in Scottsdale, Arizona. He suffered a massive heart attack and died at age 54. The wrestling world was shocked. The timing was almost impossible to comprehend. He had just made peace with his past, had just been honored by the company he'd had such a contentious relationship with, had just delivered a promo that now played like a farewell speech. In the years since his death, WWE has walked a tightrope with Warrior's legacy. They created the Warrior Award, given annually from 2015 to 2019 to individuals who exemplified perseverance and courage. But by 2025, the award has been quietly rebranded as the Immortal Award, with speculation that WWE let their licensing agreement with Warrior's estate expire, choosing to distance themselves from his controversial past while still honoring the concept of resilience he supposedly represented. Official WWE materials about Warrior focus exclusively on his in-ring accomplishments: the 2 Intercontinental Championships, the WWE Championship victory over Hogan, the electrifying entrances, and the larger-than-life persona. There is no mention of the homophobic rants, the racist comments, the blog posts attacking deceased wrestlers, or the pattern of unprofessional behavior that derailed his career multiple times. Critics call this whitewashing, a deliberate erasure of inconvenient truths to preserve a marketable legacy. Fan opinion remains deeply divided. Older fans who remember his peak years cherish the memories of that WrestleMania 6 moment, the shoulder-shaking intensity, the feeling that anything could happen when his music hit. They share tributes on social media, celebrate his birthday, and defend his Hall of Fame status. But younger fans and those aware of his post-wrestling statements question whether such behavior should be overlooked simply because someone was good at their job. Reddit threads debate whether his bigotry should disqualify him from being honored, whether his early death absolves his sins, whether nostalgia should trump accountability. Recent documentaries continue to examine his complicated legacy. A September 2025 YouTube documentary titled The Dark Side of Ultimate Warrior explores his madness and tragic end, refusing to shy away from his controversies even a decade after his death. The comment sections of these videos reveal the ongoing debate, some defending him as a product of his time, others adamantly stating that bigotry has no expiration date, that calling someone a faggot or attacking Martin Luther King Jr. isn't just a difference of opinion, but a fundamental character flaw. What makes the Ultimate Warrior's story particularly tragic is how preventable much of this was. If he had simply been a difficult personality backstage, that could have been managed. Many wrestling legends were difficult. Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart all had their moments of unprofessionalism, but they also had moments of contrition, growth, and redemption that extended beyond a last-minute reconciliation before death. Warrior's bigotry, his cruelty toward fellow wrestlers' families, his public rants that revealed not just conservative political views, but genuine hatred toward marginalized groups. These weren't youthful mistakes or heat-of-the-moment outbursts. These were sustained sustained, deliberate positions he took as a grown man well into his 40s and 50s. And unlike his ring work or his backstage behavior, these weren't just professional issues, these were moral ones. His final career statistics tell one story: 1x WWF champion, 2x Intercontinental champion, 1x WCWA Texas Heavyweight champion, 1x WCWA World Tag Team champion, 1x NWE World Heavyweight champion. He inspired generations of wrestlers with his intensity. His match with Hogan at WrestleMania 6 is still studied as a masterclass in storytelling. His impact on the business is undeniable, but the complete story of the Ultimate Warrior cannot be told without acknowledging that he was also a man who spread hate, who used his platform to demean others, who attacked his peers even after death, and who never truly apologized for the harm he caused with his words. His widow Dana and his 2 daughters have remained relatively quiet about his legacy, perhaps understanding that defending his statements is impossible and condemning them would dishonor his memory. In the end, the Ultimate Warrior's legacy will always be split between the magic of those first few years, the sprint to the ring, the shoulder shakes, the impossible physique, the feeling that we were watching something truly unique, and the bitter reality of who the man behind the paint really was. Can you separate the performer from the person? Should you? These are questions each fan must answer for themselves. What's certain is that James Bryan Hellwig achieved what he spoke about in his final promo: immortality through storytelling. But the stories being told aren't just about his victories and his intensity. They're also about his failures, his bigotry, and his tragedy. And as long as people continue to debate whether he belongs in the Hall of Fame, whether his legacy should be celebrated or condemned, he will remain alive in the conversation, a warrior still battling, even in death, for how he'll be remembered. The Ultimate Warrior had a legendary career. His many controversies may not have ruined his legacy completely, but they've certainly ensured that his story will always be told with an asterisk, a footnote, a reminder that greatness in one arena doesn't excuse cruelty in another. And perhaps that's the most fitting epitaph for a man who lived his entire life at extremes. Immortal, but forever controversial. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to watch another fascinating video like this, click on one of the boxes on your screen right now.